So my name is Lana. I am a registered physiotherapist, and we are going to chat tonight about infant gross motor development. So that will sort of be the area of focus, at least for today's webinar. A little bit about me. So like I mentioned, I am a registered physiotherapist. I also own Oscar's Place. My husband and I created Oscar's Place for kind of thinking of my son, but it's really a place for all kids who need some extra help. I do have a son, Oscar, who is 4.5, and I have a daughter, Olivia, who is 8. So tonight we'll kind of focus on typical gross motor development of infants. So really focusing on that 0 to 12-month age group. And then the role of a physiotherapist. So how physiotherapy can facilitate the achievement of those kind of major gross motor milestones. I'm sure most of you are familiar with them. They're often part of your well baby checks at your doctor. So we'll sort of go in order of achievement. So we'll chat about head control. We'll chat about tummy time. Not that that's a motor milestone, but it's a really hot topic when talking about infants. We'll then chat about rolling, sitting, standing, and then we'll get to walking. So before we sort of can learn about what the role of a physiotherapist is, we have to first learn what is considered sort of typical development. So as far as head control goes, by the time a child is 1 month old, they should be able to lift their head up intermittently well on their tummy. And then when they are on their backs, they should be able to turn their head from side to side. By the time they are 3 months old, typical development would indicate that they should be able to lift their head off of a surface for a prolonged period of time. And in assisted sitting, they should be able to hold their head in midline. So what we mean by assisted sitting is something that probably most of you are already doing. So really kind of supporting your baby just under the arms. Oh, sorry, I'm just gonna let Janet in. Hi, Janet. Hi, Janet. So assisted sitting is when you're supporting the baby just underneath their shoulder blades, and their head should be in midline. One of the things we look for early on, as far as like the infant well baby checks, is something called torticollis. Often that positioning will happen in utero, and it is a tightness of a muscle in the neck called the sternocleidomastoid. And it's a little bit of a tricky muscle in the sense that it tilts the head one way and rotates the head in the opposite direction. So again, when we go back to sort of what we're looking for as far as head control goes, the baby should be able to turn their head from side to side. And one of the first indications is that the baby's head sort of seems stuck. What we worry about sort of as a result of torticollis is plagiocephaly, which is essentially a flatness on the back side of the baby's head, and it can distort the skull shape. Babies' skulls are very malleable. That's how they get through the birth canal. So it kind of very easily happens. So how can physiotherapy help? There's really good research supporting the addition of passive movement or gentle stretching when we're talking about torticollis specifically. So when the neck is twisted and tilted, it can affect not only the muscles in the neck, but it can also affect tightness in the trunk and tightness in the arms. So those are things that we will look at. One of the other things we really focus on are repositioning techniques. So as we're stretching, trying to find ways to take pressure off of that flat spot, particularly if that flat spot has developed. So some of the ways we do that is through some modifying tummy time positions. And we will also have a discussion as far as baby containers go. So that would include things like your bucket car seat, a swing, and even if you're swaddling your baby. Swaddling is a personal choice, but swaddling can limit movement. And so when we're trying to promote movement of the head and neck, in the instance of torticollis or plagiocephaly, we will kind of discuss swaddling. And then I've got tons of tummy time modifications that we'll chat about a little bit later. And then the other major role for a physiotherapist, particularly in regards to dealing with torticollis, is facilitating the emergence of symmetrical gross motor milestones. So obviously a baby has to roll one direction first, but rolling would sort of be the first sign if that torticollis is then affecting achievement of the gross motor skills. So we really want to make sure that they can roll equally both directions depending on what is motivating the child at that time.
Sorry, Lana, can you hear me?
Yeah.
There's a couple trying to get into the chat. It says you
Oh,
have to let them in. Can you check and see if that's showing up on your end?
I have 7. I don't see anybody trying to get in. They're on the chat.
Sorry, just the one Chelsea just messaged to say that Brittany's trying to get in and she can't get on.
Oh no.
I had her try to leave and come back in, but it's still not, I guess it's still not showing up for you. I
Oh
can try
no.
resending her the Zoom link and see if she just doesn't have the right link or something.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, because I know maybe we could try resending it to her. Do you think that's possible, Ton? And we'll see if she can hop in.
Yeah, I can do that.
I can try
right now.
sending it to her. I can send it to her via text too right now. See if that works.
Yeah, because she's not showing on my list of participants. Okay, well, hopefully she can get in okay. So this will actually be a little video of my son. He did not have torticollis, but the reason why I wanted to share this picture is that this could be what a child with torticollis looks like if some of those symptoms aren't resolved. So you can see his head is tilted to the right, and you can notice that C curve. Oh, there she is. Oh, no, that's not it. Hi, Robin. Oh, so there he is. Anyway, so you can see that he sort of has, so anyway, my son had right-sided weakness, but a child with torticollis would have very similar situation, although instead of weakness on the right, it would be tightness on the right. So one of the things we would work on is some overhead reaching with that right upper extremity. And then we also do a lot of neck stretching as well.
I mean, we have a lot. We have too many.
So the next thing I wanted to chat about is tummy time, because that's just something that is a really commonly asked question. So by 3 months of age, the child should be able to lift their head off of the surface and bear weight through their forearms. So I hope you guys can see me. So they should be able to kind of play in this sort of position here. Oh, there's Brittany. Hi, Brittany. So hopefully everyone saw that. So they should be able to kind of play on their forearms by about 2 to 3 months of age. By about 4 to 5 months of age, maybe I need to lower my camera a bit. By about 4 to 5 months of age, they should be able to play on extended elbows. So they should be able to go from the forearms and then press up into straight elbows. And then by about 7 months, they should. Sorry, I'm hearing someone in the background. I don't know if it's possible to mute. Thank you so much. So by about 6 to 7 months old, the child should be able to do what we call a circle pivot. So I do have a little video. This is my daughter. And so a circle pivot is sort of a play technique on their tummy, and they really pull using their arms to get around, again, depending on what's motivating them at that time. And they should be able to turn both directions. So again, if they're only turning to the one way, despite your best efforts to motivate them to go the other way, it might be worth having a little look. But that's sort of the typical development and what we look for as far as tummy time goes. And we'll sort of chat more about tummy time as we go along. There's lots of ways that we can modify tummy time. I have sort of a better slide down the line here, but we can use a wedge and an exercise ball. Some kids really struggle with tummy time, and if they struggle with tummy time, then that means whoever is the caregiver is really discouraged to try tummy time or to kind of force tummy time. One of the common things that can be a struggle is if your child spits up a lot or maybe struggles with reflux. That can really limit tummy time. And then we also want to consider, is there another reason? So are they having weakness in their arms? Is there perhaps a little bit of a delay achieving head control? So the nice thing, I'll just show you because I have the wedge here. The nice thing about a wedge is it creates an inclined surface. So if a child has just eaten and then they're laying on their tummy, that can be uncomfortable, especially if they're struggling with reflux. A wedge allows them to be a little bit more vertical while still practicing all of the skills that we want them to practice when in tummy time. So it would be like you doing a push-up on the back of a couch versus a push-up flat on the floor. It's a lot easier and it just gets you a bit more vertical. So you can just use like a little wedge like that. Or an exercise ball is a great way to that you can have the baby on the exercise ball doing tummy time. And you can adjust the amount of incline so they can be a bit more horizontal, or you can bring them back and be a little bit more vertical. We also want to talk about and facilitate proper positioning. So the main thing is tucking those elbows under the shoulders. Some babies will like to swim, and then they're using a lot of their back extensors, and that can create sort of an asymmetrical development of trunk muscles. So then their back becomes really strong and their tummy muscles and their shoulders and scapula aren't strengthened in the same way. So we really want to promote those elbows under the shoulders. And then in tummy time, the kind of progression down the road would be the baby would start to kind of weight shift and play while they're in that position. And that sort of leads to it's sort of a precursor skill to crawling. So here are some of the tummy time modifications. So a favorite one is that top left where the baby is laying on your chest, you're kind of inclined on the couch. That absolutely counts as tummy time. You can use the exercise ball as pictured there, and then a little wedge too, as we've already discussed. So those are all really great, great options for tummy time. We do, I should say, we do want to work towards getting the child horizontal on the floor because that's a more functional position. These are more modifications if they're struggling with being in that horizontal position. So the next major milestone is rolling. So by about like 4 months-ish of age, the child will start rolling from their tummy to their back. And they might start rolling from their back to their side, so not getting fully over. And then by 6 to 7 months, they'll roll back to tummy. So in order for a child to roll, so from tummy to back, they need to be able to weight shift. So that's one of the little skills that we'll start looking for when the child is playing on their tummy is, are they just kind of playing around with a little weight shift in that position? That weight shift will then progress to sort of a prolonged period of stabilization with that down arm and then reaching. And then they also have to be able to turn their head. So they have to be able to kind of reach and turn their head to get over that way. So again, going back to that torticollis, if their head is stuck, it makes it next to impossible for them to roll. They'll roll one direction, but they won't roll the other way. And then from back to tummy, they have to be able to reach across midline, and they have to be able to separate their upper half of their trunk from their lower half of the trunk. So they have to be able to reach, and their shoulder blades will come over first and then their hips second. The other thing that a child will have to do is they'll have to really get into that cervical extension. So they'll really have to kind of lift their neck back in order to get over onto their tummy. So here is my little cutie, my daughter. So you'll see she's going to reach across with her left arm. So she has to go across to midline. You can see that she separates her kind of lower half of her trunk from her upper half of her trunk. And then she has to get a lot of cervical extension in order to achieve that. So again, just watching it, you'll see her reach across midline. And so her shoulders move first, then her hips come second, and then she has to be able to extend through her neck to get all the way over. So that would be typical development. So if a child isn't rolling, or if they're only rolling one direction, we would look at, do they have a restriction as far as how they're able to move their arms? So again, especially with a torticollis, are they restricted with being able to lift their arms up over their head? So especially if they're rolling tummy to back, they have to be able to lift their arm up in order to roll. Or is there a weakness? Are they unable to shift weight and hold weight through one arm in order to do that reach? So ways that we can kind of work on that, actually the exercise ball is a really great tool, is we can facilitate that weight shift. So what I like to do is create like a C cup with my hand, and then using the ball, I'll have them roll, kind of shift weight to the baby's left side. And then it helps to unweight this arm and makes it a little easier for them to reach. If reaching is a little bit delayed, I will kind of passively, or I will move the arm for them and kind of show them that motor plan with the hopes that then they will learn to do that independently. And then again, we'll make sure we do it to both sides. And then the cool thing with the ball too is that we can adjust how much weight they're putting through. So to make it a bit easier, I can bring the baby back a bit, and then they're not having to put as much weight through that one shoulder. And then we'll progress to a more functional position of getting them a bit more horizontal to make it more difficult and more functional. So yeah, we love the exercise ball for that one. And then back to tummy. So we'll look for trunk tightness. And then restricted cervical range of motion. So one of the ways I look for trunk tightness is we'll hold their shoulder down, bring their knees up to their chest, and make sure that that shoulder stays down to the ground. And I'll do that to both sides. So If I'm rolling my baby and they're doing a log roll, then I'll know that there's a bit of tightness on that side, and we'll kind of stretch that out a little bit. We will also assess range of motion. We can do that with whatever tool is motivating to your child. Sometimes it's a musical toy or a light up toy, but we'll really look at particularly cervical extension, or them being able to lift their neck back. So we talked about, so just while I have the baby on the exercise ball, we'll go to that last point, which is a cervical extension stretch on the exercise ball. Again, you'd want to be maybe a little cautious with if your baby has reflex doing this. You're not going to go way far back. Your baby's head won't be stiff like mine. It'll be kind of relaxed on the ball. And you'll gently roll them back just so they're past horizontal, and the weight of their head will gently pull them into a little bit of extension. And the nice thing about this is you can get right on top of baby and sing to them or whatever to comfort them in that position. And then as far as like manual treatment, what we would do is I really like to keep my hands on the baby's hips, and we'll sort of control that hip to roll them over. The other thing that I'll do is kind of, if they're able to get straight onto their side, is I will put my hand behind them, which will prevent them from reversing that position. And so their only goal is to go forward. And then you'd want some motivating toy to sort of focus on that cervical extension. So I just happen to have this little spin toy here. So ideally the baby would be really motivated by the spin toy, and they'd be looking at it and reaching and wanting to play, and then they'd end up over onto their tummy. So the next big milestone is sitting. So by about 4 to 5 months of age, the child will sort of start experimenting with prop sitting. So what we mean by prop sitting is the baby will sit with their arms supported on the floor, either on the floor or on their legs, but they'll have weight through their arms. By 6 to 7 months, they should be able to sit independently with relatively good balance and no hands. And then by 8 to 9 months, they should be transitioning in and out of sitting on their own. So we always kind of expect that stability piece to come first. So stability being the child is sitting independently before they are able to move in and out of that position. So this is another video of my little guy, and you can see that he is prop sitting there. So his hands are weight bearing through the floor. His feet are nice and wide. So the wider their legs are, the more stable. The more narrow their legs are, the less stable they are. So I'll play this video. We'll just kind of talk through it. So he's kind of sitting up. He's experimenting with reaching. His back extensors aren't very strong, so he's kind of struggling getting up into sitting. And then the next step is working on what we call that co-contraction of their tummy and their back muscles. So it is a skill for kids to learn how to contract their tummy muscles with the same strength that they contract their back muscles. And so I'll play that again. That's why he's a little wobbly. So you can see when he sits up, he's a bit wobbly because he's sort of trying to sort out his center of gravity and figure out what muscles he needs to contract. And oh, he contracted his back extensors too much. So then he has to come back forward. This goes back to, again, that tummy time position. Kids who play in that swimmer, so with no hands, and they're really using their back extensors, once they get into sitting, they can tend to want to fling backwards often. And it's just because they're so used to contracting and overusing their back extensors. So again, just reiterating kind of that importance of the proper technique with tummy time. And then we have some techniques that we use when we work on sitting with those kids who like to fling backwards. Like one of them is we'll kind of encourage what we call that flexed position. So we'll sit the child on the edge of a table or a bed, and it just encourages that flexion instead of having them fling back, or it takes a lot more work for them to fling backwards that way. So again, if we have a child who's perhaps a little delayed with the achievement of sitting, we will consider their arm strength. So did they have a limited experience in prop sitting because they had arm weakness? That could potentially delay the achievement of independent sitting. Do they have weak trunk muscles? Do they have tight hamstrings? So if their hamstrings are tight, it's going to limit their ability to sit with their legs out in front of them. Do they have tight or weak hip external rotators? So that can also limit their ability to sit comfortably in sitting if they don't feel like they have that support at the hips. And then the other thing that sort of plays into that arm weakness is, do they have poor balance reactions, which are decreasing their confidence? So when a child is learning how to sit, we call it like an upper extremity extension reflex. So they should be able to kind of quickly put their hand out so that they don't topple over and fall. So is there a reason why they aren't able to kind of extend their elbows and sort of save themselves from injuring themselves when they fall? So here, I think I get into those balance reactions in a little bit. So here are some things that we would do as far as treatment goes. So again, here is my little guy. He is sitting on an exercise ball, but it's easier. His feet, I think, are supported there on the floor. And we're working on reaching. So in this video, it's reaching overhead. And what you'll notice is just the engagement of his back extensors. So you'll really see his back extensors activate to reach up and get the motivating toy. Which one? Oh, the tambourine. So you can see, I'll play that again. You can see just how the shape of his back changes. He's really engaging those back muscles to reach up and grab in that case, it was the musical toy that he was interested in. So here we're working on his obliques, so the muscles on the side of our trunk. And so I'm kind of tipping him side to side on the exercise ball. I do have something in his hand, because without something in his hand, he might put his hands down on the exercise ball, and then I'm really limiting the challenge for him. So I do want his hands up. So it's purely a tummy exercise. And then the nice thing here too is there's eye contact, and perhaps I'm singing to him or something. I do want his head looking forward. I try to avoid any rotation in this position. And I am just supporting him on his hips. Depending on the child's ability, you might have to raise your hands up a little bit higher, so you're sort of just under their armpits. And then here's another one. So I'm sort of doing a circular motion on the ball, and I would go both directions. I'm just not sure if both directions are shown in this video. But what I want you, or I'm hoping that you notice, is just the position of his pelvis. So we really work on sort of that anterior, that forward tilt and that backwards tilt of his pelvis. And that helps to engage those lower abdominals. Sorry, you're going to have to listen to my singing. But again, it's nice eye contact. He has something in his hand to prevent his hands from going down. So he's really engaging his tummy muscles. And then you'll notice the difference in his in his pelvis position as he's doing the circle. So sort of chatted about this just as far as judging the challenge. You want to support the trunk. So you can start up nice and high, and then as the child gets stronger, you can lower your hand placement so you're just supporting at the hips. And then to improve the upper extremity or the arm, that extension balance response, one cool little tool that they sell is this Billabo, and that's pictured here. And it's a seat that you put the child in and essentially you tip the child side to side. And you can see that child is working on that extensor response. Another nice, easy game that you can play with your child is airplane. Maybe not the airplane that you're thinking of, but you would really support the child's trunk and quickly drop them down to the surface. It is a reflexive response, so the movement does have to be relatively fast to get that fast movement from the child. So you want to do it on a soft surface like a couch or a bed or a chair or something soft where they won't hurt themselves. So you're going to kind of zoom, 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 drop, and wait for that upper extremity response. And then more advanced sitting exercises would be seated reaching. So you could do it on a stable surface, whether the child is just sitting straight on the floor, or if they tend to fling sitting on the edge of a table where you're supporting their hip and you're having them reach. And you want to encourage reaching in all different directions. So sideways, upwards, and then also adding a rotation component too. And then you can progress from a stable surface to then an unstable surface, like an exercise ball or a foam pad or a Bosu ball or something a little less forgiving. So the next big milestone is crawling, and crawling has become sort of a point of contention because I don't believe they ask it on well baby checks anymore. But I still think crawling is a really great indicator for a lot of things, including shoulder strength, hip strength, tummy strength, coordination. I think it gives us a lot of information. So it is nice if a child crawls, and especially if a child crawls, we want to encourage that 4-point crawl pattern. Any deviation from that sort of typical all fours crawling could indicate some asymmetry that we might want to address. Just a side note, we don't really worry when they're first starting a new skill if they do it kind of wonky, because they're discovering how their body works and they're learning a new skill. But I would say if they tend to use an atypical crawl pattern for longer than about 4 weeks, and it's their primary mode of getting around, that it might be worth looking into. Anyways, kind of going back to this slide. So at about 8 to 9 months old, the child should be able to get into or be in all fours and sort of experimenting with weight shifting. So what they'll do is, I'm going to lower the camera again, is they'll be in all fours and they'll just kind of be rocking forwards and backwards. So they'll go from arm to arm, and then they'll also kind of experiment with that weight shifting in their hips too. They may also experiment with army crawling, and especially if we go back to that circle pivot, where they're kind of going in a circle, only using their arms, it isn't unreasonable to think that perhaps they might go forwards or even backwards on their arms. But again, if it lasts longer than sort of 4 weeks, we wonder why aren't they engaging their hips and why aren't they using their trunk muscles to get up into all fours. By about 10 to 12 months, they should be crawling on hands and knees, and they should be navigating objects. So they should be able to kind of crawl over a toy or up someone's leg that might be in the way. So if the child isn't crawling or is demonstrating an atypical crawl pattern that is lasting longer than about 4 weeks, you would do an assessment, because every child is different. Of course, it's hard for me to say at this point why, but some questions that I would ask is, can the child get into that all fours position? And if not, why is that? Is it weakness in their arms? Is it weakness in their hip muscles? Are they tight sort of in the front of their hips? And then can the child weight shift and reach in that all fours position? So again, we look at the stability of being in that all fours. And then we want to start adding the mobility piece, because crawling obviously is a mobile form of this position. So we want to see them experimenting with a weight shift, and they might even go forwards and backwards too. And we want to see them experimenting with reaching as well. One of the common sort of atypical crawl patterns that might emerge from a child who has a history of torticollis is a hitch crawl pattern. So their one leg is up and they're crawling this way. So if I'm crawling this way, I'm not using my arms a whole lot. And I also probably have some tightness in my trunk and some tightness in my hips. So those are asymmetries that we would want to address, because those asymmetries don't go away once a child is walking. So treatment options, again, this is based on the assessment, but we would modify the surface. So a wedge is great. We use a wedge all the time. It's easier for the child, that inclined surface. So we would get them in all fours here. And I would kind of tuck their knees under, have their arms weight bearing down, and work on stability here. If the child has weakness in their arms, they might be okay kind of keeping those knees under their hips, but they might need me to kind of provide that C-cup stability in their shoulders. If the child is okay to kind of go up on extended elbows, but their hips are staying down, then what I might do is come behind them, almost kind of straddle and give like a little bit of a squeeze in, just to provide a bit of extra support for their hips, and have them play in this position. And then we want some type of motivating toy to see if we can encourage a bit of a reach. So once we're in this position, we would facilitate a weight shift and a reach, just like we did in tummy time. So I think I covered everything on that slide. Another sort of great trick to work on glute strength. So if the child is struggling lifting their bottom up in that all fours position, would be tall kneeling. So the video on the left shows my son in kneeling. He's not really tall kneeling. So there's a difference between playing in this position and playing in this position. So this is tall kneeling. So I'm really having to engage the muscles in my bottom to get up. A big thing to get the child to play in tall kneeling is appropriate height of the toy. So it could be just in this video, I didn't have the toy high enough. But the nice thing here is that he is getting a bit of weight bearing through his hands. I am providing some lateral support, so some support on either side of his hips, hoping that if he feels stable enough, he might experiment with that mobility piece. Again, stability comes before mobility. So I'm just helping him with the stability portion. And then this video here on the right, he is in all fours. Sorry, I was super excited he reached there, but you can see I'm still providing him with like a little bit of support on either side of his hips. And I'm really hoping for a reach, and I got one, and I was super excited. So the next big one is standing. So at about 7 months, the child might be interested in standing supported at the waist. So that's when kind of the child is sitting and then they're standing up and you're just have support down here. By about 8 to 9 months, they might be interested in walking with both of their hands held. By 12 months old, they should, or typical development would say that the child is able to stand independently for about 3 seconds. They would probably be pulling independently to stand at a stable surface, so a coffee table. They might cruise along furniture, so walking along the coffee table, and they may be able to walk with only one hand held. And then by 12 to 14 months, they should be able to take kind of 4 to 5 steps independently. If by 15, 16 months at the latest, if they're not showing really good kind of progression through these stages, then I would recommend a physiotherapy assessment. Typical walking is anywhere from sort of like 9 to 18 months. But I think if they're really not showing good progression by like that 15, 16 month mark, it's worth just having someone take a peek. So there are so many different treatment options, all based on the assessment and what the child needs. So some different treatments we would do would first be work on standing balance. So a horizontal surface or a flat surface like a coffee table is easier for the child versus a vertical surface like walking along a sliding glass door. So that would be a progression we would work on, is horizontal to vertical. We would also work on standing balance with 2 hands, and then with 1 hand. We would also look for some trunk rotation, and then we would also look for no body support. So the child not leaning with their tummy against the surface. So it really should be just their hands touching the surface and a good distance between their tummy and the surface. We also want to consider balance reactions in standing. So how a child should fall safely, because every child falls, but how a child should fall safely in standing is through a deep squat, so that they end up kind of standing and then sitting on their bum. That's how we want them to fall. Another balance reaction that we would look for is a stepping response. So just like you or I might stumble and take kind of a step out to the side, we would look for that in a child as well. We would also look for that upper extremity extension response that carries over from sitting. So again, if the child really falls, we want to make sure that they can put their hand out in addition to that deep squat. We would also work on some facilitated walking. So the stages would be sort of 2 hands to 1 hand and then to a rigid object. So a rigid object could be a marker, it could be a wooden spoon, it could be a whisk, just something stable that's not the security blanket of their caregiver's hands. So we really try to go hands off and have them grab something else. Another nice option would be hands on the child's hips. And I think I have some videos coming up of a few of these. So here are some standing balance options. So these are all my son. The first one is him walking along a vertical surface. So his tummy is not touching the surface. And then eventually here he does do a reach. So he does kind of have a prolonged period of time where he just has one hand touching. So that demonstrates good balance. Here, I'm trying to get a rotation. So again, you can see his tummy's not touching. I'm waiting for that right arm to reach off of the vertical surface, and he's doing a nice trunk rotation there. And of course, you would want to do it on the other side as well. And then this last video is him hanging on to a hula hoop. So that could also be an example of a rigid object. But he's actually just kind of pushing our swing. His tummy isn't touching. He's just hanging on to that hula hoop for a little bit of support and pushing the swing. A little bit of rotation there as well. Here are a couple videos of my daughter just demonstrating sort of the progression of the deep squat balance response. So in this first video, she's walking, just pushing a little push cart. So walking is, I don't think she's independently walking at this time, but you can see her kind of experiment with that deep squat when she's ready to no longer be standing. And that's how you want them to fall safely. And then in this next video, she's a little bit more of an advanced walker. And then she'll lose her balance and sit on her bum, and she actually put her arm out as well. So again, that's that combo of that transitioning through the deep squat and then also that upper extremity response to a loss of balance. And here are some ways I'm working on that with my son. So in the video on the left, I'm really trying to encourage that deep squat. He has low muscle tone. So what some kids will do when they have lower muscle tone is they lock out their joints, because then you can use the stability of that bone-on-bone contact. So it takes a lot more muscle work to not have your joints locked out. So here I think I'm just supporting him a little bit, just again, trying to give him a little bit of stability. And then I'm looking for that knee bend, which he gets, which is awesome. So that's just kind of that precursor to that deep squat. Here in this next video, again, I'm working on, he has a little bit more weakness in that right side, which carried over from that sitting video that I showed earlier. So again, just kind of working on that knee bend through that right leg he really struggled with. And I'm just providing a bit of support at the ankle there, and I'm kind of forcing it by lifting up that left knee. This one on the right, I think, is a little bit earlier. I think he's a little bit younger than that one on the right, so he needs a bit more support even standing back up, and you can see him kind of struggle to get his knee straight. And then here are some walking videos. I do apologize for my hair. It looks crazy. But in this video on the left, again, it's all that same transition from when we're working on that standing balance and him holding a rigid object like the hula hoop or a wooden spoon. Here, one of my son's favorite toys was a little tambourine. So I'm trying to get him to not hold my hand. So I'm holding the tambourine and he's taking some independent steps. And the cool thing with that too is that I can even kind of pull the the little tambourine forward and encourage that shift of weight over the balls of his feet. And then here we're doing some walking with the hula hoop. So again, he's not holding my hand, but he's getting support with the hula hoop. I'm not sure if this was the same day as when he was just standing, pushing the swing, but you can see when he was standing and pushing the swing, he was fine to just have one hand on. But then when we add that mobility piece or him walking, he requires the two hands on just for additional support. Here were some other really early balance strategies that we used. So with his back supported on a couch and using one of his favorite motivational toys, which was music toys, we're working on that shift from his heels to his toes. Oops. We're working on that shift from his heels to his toes. So that shift of his center of mass forward, which is a precursor skill to taking some steps. And then in this video on the right, you can see I have hands off, but I'm helping with that weight shift. So I'm really putting weight onto that right foot and hoping that he'll swing that left foot through. And as he's weight bearing, I am giving him a bit more support on that standing side. And then I think I'm also kind of helping him swing that right leg forward as well. So that's an option too. This is, feel free to read this if you want, but the World Health Organization sort of did a big study and broke down what it means, or their definition of achievement of each of these skills. For example, sitting without this support, they said the head erect for at least 10 seconds, child doesn't use their arms, hands and knees crawling, the stomach doesn't touch the supporting surface, and it has to be at least 3 in a row for them to kind of check that box. This is pretty consistent, walking independently, taking about 5 steps with an upright posture. And then standing alone, they considered it to be 10 seconds. So that's just kind of like a nice definition of what the World Health Organization considers as far as a proper achievement of each of those gross motor milestones. And then they included this really cool chart that just shows the window. So although we say, independent sitting is 6 to 7 months, here it's kind of anywhere from 4 to 9 months. And then when we chatted about the walking, sort of around 9 months to about 18 months. And that's sort of that's considered sort of that window of typical. But I think if they're really at that 15 or 16 month mark and not making really good steps towards independent walking, that you should consider a physiotherapy assessment. And another thing that we really consider is motivation. Your child has to innately want to do these things. They're often too young to understand commands. So we have to figure out what motivates them and take advantage of that. So kids often have a preference to a certain toy. Suction toys work really great. We use them all the time at the clinic. You can use them on your sliding glass door, on your fridge. Some kids, like my son, really like musical toys. So any type of tambourine or bells, he just loved. Some kids really like to spin, and spin toys work really well when we're focusing on reaching. So whether it's reaching in tummy time or reaching in all fours, spin toys work really well. Some kids are really attracted to any toy that lights up. And then some kids are really attracted to their favorite stuffed animal, and that might motivate them to reach or start crawling or moving or doing that circle pivot to get their stuffed animal. Some kids are highly motivated by their caregiver. So again, that tummy time position or that face-to-face contact can be really motivating and special for both child and caregiver. Some children are very motivated by food. My one sort of hesitation with that is we never want to mess with caloric intake. So feeding is always number one. But I'm talking about if you're just kind of giving your kid a couple of those little puffs or the rice crackers, like if you're not really counting them towards their caloric intake, then I would consider them snacks. And then it would be okay to kind of use those as a motivator. A soother can be a really great motivator as well, particularly when we're working on turning the head. Babies have something called a rooting reflex where they'll turn their head and look for food. So we can use a soother and kind of rub it on their cheek, and it will encourage sort of that reflexive head turn. And I did want to say, so I'm doing a couple just gross motor drop-ins over the summer. So the first one is coming up, I guess that's next week, on Thursday, July 6th, and then August 10th. And you can bring your gross motor questions then as well, and we can kind of problem solve together if that's of interest to you. And you can just easily register online or give us a call if you have difficulty registering online. And I just have my resources.